You know, guys, when I heard that there was a rumor that we were getting a new StarFox this year, I was both excited and incredibly skeptical because it has been a while since we've had a StarFox game. In fact, the last one was StarFox Zero. And while I may have played it, I know not a lot of people did. It was on a console that really didn't sell very well, the Wii U. And it was a game that didn't review very well on top of that. So it kind of was a compounding effect. StarFox also would show up on the Switch in a game called Battle for Starlink or Starlink Battle for Atlas. That's it. Which I also had that game because I'm admittedly a pretty big StarFox fan. But that game also didn't do particularly well. It was at the end of the Toys to Life kind of concept, and while they weren't amiibo, they were kind of like amiibo. The game was kind of weird to play, honestly, at the age that I was playing it, because they wanted you to take the controller and attach it to the ship that you were using. But there was an all digital version that was a little bit more accessible, albeit with like a bunch of DLC, and you can still buy it. But the Nintendo Switch version of that game included Fox McCloud and Falco as playable characters. And so Star Fox has kind of been in the background. Like, you could play Fox, Falco, and Wolf in Smash. If you saw the most recent Super Mario movie, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, there was a couple of scenes with Fox McCloud in it. And so it's been a while since Star Fox has been at the forefront. And so it was very, very interesting that out of the blue, Nintendo announced StarFox, a reimagined version of the Nintendo 64 story. Now, here's the thing, right? When watching the Direct, was like, is it really just 64 again? And then I was like, well, actually, now that I'm really thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about it, because I admittedly am a very big Star Fox fan, and I am totally picking this up. So yeah, let's get right into it. Hello and welcome. My name is Wolfy. Normally I am in VR chat for the intro of these things, but I just needed to get this done quickly, and I did not have time to get completely set up in VR. So I do have the ability to go almost 2D. It's still a 3D model, but I can do this every once in a while. That being said, today we're talking about Star Fox Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, or Star Fox TM, because the name of it's really just Star Fox. I'm actually on the Nintendo website right now looking at it. And honestly, this is a very interesting take on Star Fox in general. So first off, the graphics of the R-Wing and the levels look amazing. Like, this is the Switch 2 actually using its power to make a game that looks pretty damn good. Then we have the character models, which they've grown on me. My first initial reaction was, okay, that's a little weird. But then when I saw Fox kind of hunched over a little bit like a dog piloting a jet, that's where it sold me on that. And then I found out that they actually have paws. Falco has like literal talons, and I was like, oh, they went like onto the dangerously furry scale to this time. Like, these are animals with like slight human features. And honestly, it's a pretty bold direction to go. I know some people absolutely hate it because it is too furry for them. And for me, I'm like, it helps them stand out a little bit amongst the other games that have anthro characters. Taking a bold direction like this will make it so that, they're more animal than they are humanoid. And that, it's an interesting choice, and it's grown on me. My first initial reaction was, oh my God, these are crazy. But looking at like Slippy Toad's derp face as like he has like the frog proportions, or Fox looking like a fox standing on his hind legs, Falco has like a very bird-like movement to like his crest and everything, and it works really well, actually, at least in my opinion. I know some people absolutely hate it because, I mean, this it is towing a weird line into uncanny, because we got very realistic fur, very realistic proportions, but then like human hands, which is weird, but then paws and claws, and it's unique. And that's where like I can't tell if I love it or hate it, but I'm leaning on the side of actually liking it a lot. Every character has a unique silhouette. If you were to actually take like the main image of the box art and you were to silhouette them out, you'd be able to tell each character apart, which you could do with, I think, the original designs, but it was still very, very interesting to see them go in such a bold direction. Where they didn't go in a bold direction is the gameplay itself. This is StarFox 64 again. Now, I've heard people say this is the 4th, this is the 5th time this game has been remade. It's the 3rd time StarFox 64 directly has been remade. StarFox Zero, as someone who played it, was a reimagining of the first game, which was reimagined in the 64 version, which is where some of the confusion comes in. So 64 was a reimagining of the original StarFox. They're both based off the Lylat Wars. And that got re-released as the StarFox 3D. And then StarFox Zero was an attempt to do something new with the same war. But it plays very similarly. Like a lot of the tracks are very, very similar. But there's the new walker segments, new vehicles that didn't exist in the original game that were references to StarFox 2. A bunch of like little things that made it actually very, very different. But also a motion control system where you aimed with your Wii U gamepad and you flew with the TV. Kind of complicated and really hard to do with like an actual TV. I found it most comfortable to do in like a monitor setup. And so that game, I ran through a couple of the routes and it wasn't my favorite. And I've played every StarFox game. So I can tell you right now that I can tell the difference between 64 and Zero, where the 3DS version of 64 was more faithful, actually was just a port of the original game. So this would be the 3rd time that 64 is directly being remade. But if we want to count the original game, this would be like the 5th version of the Lylat Wars, because we had the original 64, 64 3D, Zero, and this one. Yeah, so 5 times that the Lylat Wars, the original, essentially StarFox game, was being recreated. And the story behind like the original to 64, so the Super Nintendo to 64 version, is fascinating from both like a technical and a historical standpoint. Like the original Super FX Super Nintendo version and the 64 version, essentially like the 64 version was the game that they wanted to make but couldn't make. And so that's why they did it that way. And so it was a reboot of the original timeline. And now we're rebooting that timeline again, which means that we could get Dinosaur Planet or we could not. They could be completely retconning Dinosaur Planet out of the entire StarFox mythos. And I think we should kind of talk about that a little bit. So I actually started with Dinosaur Planet and Assault. I started on the GameCube generation and I went back to the N64 generation after I had played those games. And so my perspective on the series coming from the GameCube, which was further along in that continuity, was that StarFox was actually a very unique game with lots of different play styles, as were people who started with the original Super Nintendo game and to the N64 knew it as an on-rails shooter. And I think a lot of people really kind of want that out of the series. And so StarFox from the GameCube generation onward is a game with an identity crisis. There was the Zelda style gameplay of Dinosaur Planet. There was the, I would say 2000s third person shooter style that happened in Assault. And then there's the classic gameplay from the Nintendo 64. And everybody who's played these games of those generations have a different perspective of what StarFox should be. And this is why I actually don't think it's a stupid idea to reboot the timeline, especially after Zero. So my perspective when Zero came out was that they should reboot the timeline because of how confusing things were getting. And Command actually puts a nice little bow at the end of the story for that timeline specifically, because there's multiple endings, and you can like find out. There are endings where Fox has a child and retires, and there's endings where he becomes an F-Zero pilot. StarFox Command is a wild game. If you ever have a chance to play it, and I hope that 3DS emulation ends up on the Switch too, so people can play it at some point. But if you ever get a chance to play it, it is a wild game. Digressing, when it comes down to the timeline that we got, that was the 64 GameCube and DS game, that's a pretty tight package. There's not really as much room to go in any direction, really, without having to retcon something in there. And so that's why with the Wii U, they retconned a bunch of stuff and did StarFox Zero as a new timeline. This is a retcon of the retcon because StarFox Zero didn't do well. It was critically panned. It sold horribly, and it was on a console that didn't sell well at all. It didn't do anything to move the needle for Wii U's. And so them going back to 64 to a classic style makes a lot of sense. Am I a little disappointed that we are going back to this original style with like very little changes? Yeah, I kind of want some extra missions, but calling this a direct port is also disingenuous. And let me explain why. So if you actually go on YouTube right now, you can look at the whole unedited, uninterrupted prologue to the game. And it is about a 3.5 minute video. We don't know if there's actual additional gameplay attached to this prologue, but 3.5 minutes is actually longer than the entire prologue for the Nintendo 64 game. And that's just the section, the little paragraph about James McCloud being betrayed. We get to see it on screen. It's actually portrayed in a cinematic way. And if you actually look at Nintendo's own website for this, it's a cinematic take on the Star Fox 64 story. That is a direct quote from them, featuring fully voiced dialogue, an epic orchestral soundtrack, and a complete visual overhaul for the Nintendo Switch 2. Which means to me that this 3.5 minute cutscene is going to be the norm going through the game. And so a game that normally could be completed in like roughly 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how fast you wanted to go, could have these additional cutscenes in them that could flesh this out into a 2-3 hour experience per run. Maybe. I don't think it'd be that long. Maybe an hour per run makes more sense, but flesh it out enough that each run with the story connections could actually feel kind of impactful. In fact, imagine thinking like almost like a Telltale game where going through different routes a different way might have a different story impact instead of having the same cutscene. Let's say going from sector Y down, as opposed to going through the upper route, the more difficult route, could end up with completely different like storytelling on how we got to this route, to this route, to this route. Different experiences. I know there's like when Slippy like gets absolutely like crushed in I think it's the desert. There's a level that Slippy has to be rescued from specifically. There could be different storytelling or even a different outcome that they could have added in. So they do have room to make things different here, and I'm really reserving my judgment until I have the game in order to determine how lazy of a remake this actually is. I mean, on a visual front, it's a complete overhaul. Gameplay looks mostly the same, but I bet you it's going to control just a little bit better. I was playing the 64 version for footage for this video with an N64 controller. I was like, I forgot how clunky this thing is, specifically because it's the Z and the R button to do like the turns and everything. And so they have room for improvement with a modern controller that they would not have if they were just using the N64 controller, which surprisingly you can use in this game. So it's going to have the same number of inputs, but I think it's going to be more optimized for modern controllers, which will be honestly an improvement to the original experience. I mean, the visuals are as well. And so the question then becomes, how much additional content are we going to get? Is it going to be a dramatic amount of additional playtime? Is each run going to go from 30 minutes to an hour each, or 30 minutes to 2 hours each? it's hard to say because we don't really necessarily know yet. And how many different scenarios are there actually going to be? This is a game that, for the most part, if you know what you're doing, you can run every route pretty quickly. Now, they did add additional challenges, which is really, really cool. They fleshed out the multiplayer a little bit more. There's online play for it. There's this funky little, essentially what I'm doing with my avatar right now, face tracking feature, where you can use the Nintendo Switch camera to track your face and become your very own space persona. Okay, it's not your very own. You're going to be one of the main characters. I did notice that menu goes down a fair bit further than the 6 we saw. So, no, it's 8 we saw. Yeah, a total of 8. Because we saw all of StarFox and all of Starwolf. I could think Fox McCloud and Dross. I didn't see Rob64. I don't think Rob64 exists in this game, which is an interesting choice, actually. But we didn't see him. Could be General Pepper. Cat would make sense. That might make another row. Point is, there are more faces to use than what we saw. And then there's additional features. The Japanese site shows that you could put fox ears on your face and stuff like that. And that's all for voice chat functionality, which I never use, despite having 3 Switch 2s in the house. So none of us use voice chat. Most of them we're just using Discord on a separate device. But kind of cool, kind of fun. That being said, I do think Nintendo is hiding something here. I do not think that they're hiding a whole bunch of new levels, but I do think that they're hiding different ways to enjoy the levels. So there's something about game development, and especially an overhaul like this, when you don't have to make maps in particular. One way to really flesh out a game where you reuse a lot of assets and you have to make the models anyway would be to do an alternate story from a different perspective. And I don't know why I'm getting Sonic Adventure Battle 2 out of this. Maybe it's just the furries, but I almost feel like a Starwolf campaign might be feasible, where you go from Venom to Corneria, go backwards. And I honestly think that it would be kind of cool to do that alternate timeline kind of stuff, because StarFox plays around with alternate timelines all the time. But you have the same number of characters, you have fully modeled all of them, and you fully modeled their enemy ships, which are not just color swaps, but actually different ships than the StarFox ships. So it could be an interesting way to further pad out the experience, is if there were different storylines or additional stories. So something they could do is they could have the James McCloud prologue chapter as a playable thing, which would be really cool. Especially if you're playing as Peppy trying to just get back to Corneria. Or imagine you're playing as Cat trying to not necessarily get involved in this and having, unfortunately, some behind the scenes stuff that you got to do. Like, there's so many ways that they could go about it. And they don't even have to change all that much. So is there a possibility Nintendo does it? Maybe. That being said, this game is not full priced. This is not a $70 game. It's not a $60 game. It is a $50 game. Just $10 more than the 3DS version that released. Oh my gosh, was it like 15 years ago? 10 years ago? Oh man, it's been a long time. So it is actually a really compelling price. That's for the digital version. Physical, it is 60, but I'm probably just gonna pick it up digital. That $10 off is real tempting, and I really don't think that too many more people in my household want to play it. So yeah, I'll probably just pick it up digitally. And at that price, I don't know how much they would add. I really don't. Like, they could literally leave it as is, and it's not even that much more expensive than the original game. To be honest, the original game was actually pretty expensive. So realistically, they could or they could not have extra content. I don't know. I'm just getting that feeling, that the feeling of the depths from Tears of the Kingdom, where there was something else. And that something else might exist, might not exist. I can't say one way or the other because I'm not going to know until June 25th when it comes out. And guess what? I am going to be playing it on June 25th because, yeah, I love StarFox and I'm excited for it. It's also 14 gigabytes, 14.8 gigabytes. That could just literally be art assets, but that seems a bit big for StarFox 64. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm excited. It is a rare opportunity for Nintendo to actually possibly reboot the series, introduce it to a bunch of new people, and at a really good introductory price. And it might be the first game in a series of games by Nintendo for StarFox. And I would be so happy if this really is just the introduction that gets the foot in the door and the game series starts to actually make new games in a new timeline. And we get to see where that goes. I mean, it would be weird for them to go back to Dinosaur Planet, but then how would they introduce Crystal, who is like a fan favorite? And I mean, let's be honest. Do we want to see Crystal in this art style? I don't know. I don't know how they do it. That I just thought about how hard that's going to actually be. Okay, yeah, that's where we're going to end this one, though, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, consider giving me a like, maybe comment, subscribe. And I will see you next time where we'll talk about something different. Maybe even Forza, because that's coming out real soon, and I plan on playing that. So, yeah. I'll see you next time, guys. Wolfy out.